17104.com. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Greetings, my friends, and salutations. Welcome again to the Richard James Show. We're going to have another episode in our series on the Jackson family. If you recall, our last program a couple of weeks ago, we had a very, very good interview with several members of the family. We have some members of the family here right now. And just for you who didn't tune in to our last show, the Jackson family, I became acquainted with the Jackson family in my hometown of Chester, Pennsylvania. And the Jackson's family is one of the most prominent African-American families in the city of Chester. They have had much, and they're a very unusual group of people. Not only are they successful in terms of their career and in terms of their education, they're successful in terms of this whole process called life and interacting with people. They have also committed themselves to the struggle of freeing ourselves, from the bondages of discrimination and racism in this society. They've moved past barriers. There's no African American that have had this journey on this planet and this nation that has not faced barriers that have hindered us. Well, today we're going to look at the Jackson family and some of the accomplishments. The last program we did a whole series on the military, and there were at least 7 members of this family that were involved in the military. But another thing is very, very unusual. There's so many members, and I'm not sure. I'll let them tell you how many were involved in different forms of athletics, including martial arts, baseball, boxing, archery, different things, but they've been very, very accomplished in terms of the things that they have done. And it's so important when we've accomplished these things that we share that with our people. We cannot let anyone else other than ourselves write our history. And the Jackson family, and I mean, we got an author here, Brother Eric Jackson, who is a writer, a professional writer, and who has taught writing in English for many, many years. And I'm hoping to see this family's journey in print. But what I'm going to do, and I'm going to relinquish my usual coordinating role to the very distinguished and accomplished Doctor of Jurisprudence, Mr. Antonio Jackson. And he will help to coordinate this because he has the information. He's one of the really younger Jacksons in terms of the tree. I'm going to turn it over to him since he did such a wonderful job this last week, and he can introduce his siblings and give you some foreground. Go take it away and introduce our participants, Antonio. Take care now.
Yes, sir. And unlike the previous program, Richard, thank you for that introduction. And we want to also give thanks to Reverend Christopher Thomas, who is the owner and established this wonderful, wonderful internet radio program that's now on YouTube. And it will be available it might even be available in real time. I know it will be available after we end this program. But I have along with me 2 of my younger brothers, Christopher, who's about 2 years younger than me. He was in the Air Force and went to Korea. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us last time. And so we're glad that he could join us. I don't know if he's going to be able to be with us with video, but audio, he will be participating. And we're hoping that he'll be able to respond to why we're here this afternoon. We also have on the program Eric, who lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, well, actually Middletown, which is right a part of a suburb of Harrisburg. And he spent over 20 years in the Air Force Guard in Pennsylvania, and actually was involved with the Afghanistan war. And we have a couple photographs of him when he was over there. And he has some interesting stories to tell about that experience. But he also has some other interesting stories about his experience in the military. The last time we had our oldest surviving sibling, Lewis Jackson, who lives in Colorado. Actually, he spends time between Colorado Springs and Denver. And unfortunately, he had about 4 doctor appointments, and he's not able to join us today. One of the words that came to mind when Richard was introducing us and talking about the Jackson family, we're very much aware of our accomplishments, but at the same time, we approach life. One of the watchwords for us, for all of us, every single one of us, is humility.
Yes.
So it's not often that one has an opportunity to share to an international audience about your life story. And Richard James, because of his connection with our family that goes way, way back to living in the projects of Lamoken Village and then on 8th Street and 9th Street, Richard is basically a family member. And he actually took my older sister Amanda to the junior prom, I think. And he hung out with my older brothers, some of whom most of whom are no longer with us.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do was very, very briefly recap what we talked about at our previous segment. And then we will share some things that we didn't have an opportunity, along with some photographs. We'll share some things that we didn't have an opportunity to discuss at the on the last program. So with that, as Richard said, this is a conversation this afternoon with the Jacksons, some of the Jacksons. And it's a conversation that's going to focus on our military experience. I dare say that there aren't too many families in the United States who had 7 veterans in the family. Of course, that's partly because there were 11 of us, but that's still an important point that of the 11 men in the family, 7 of us were veterans. And again, I don't know of any family, I'm sure there may be some, but I don't know of any other family in the United States with 7 veteran brothers. There were 11 men, 2 girls. My parents came up to New Jersey initially from Georgia, where they were sharecroppers, and they eventually found their way to Chester, Pennsylvania during the late 30s. And my brothers, Tom and my oldest brother, Dula, who's now deceased, they were the children at that time when they came up north. And then my sister Rebecca was born.
Yes.
And then my sister Amanda, and then Lewis was born, and then Floyd, Lucius Jr., Will, his nickname. And then there was Andrew, who's in State College. He's still with us, and Lewis is still with us. Tom and Dula have passed. Then Flick, or Floyd, he passed a couple years ago. And then there was Lucius, who spent 2 years in the Army. Flick was 2 years in the Army. And then myself, I did 6 years in the Air Force Reserves. Initially, in fact, the entire time that I was in the reserves, I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. Then there was Chris, who spent 2 years, I think, in the Army. He'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong. And he spent 2 years in the Army, and a lot of his time, maybe a year or so, he was actually stationed in Korea.
I spent 6 years and 9 months in the Air Force.
Okay, I'll let Chris talk about his own experience. But and then there's Eric, who, as I mentioned, spent over 20 years in the Air Guard. And Eric was the youngest of the military, of the veterans. And then we have two younger siblings, neither of whom, Norman, who's after Eric, and Dennis, who's the youngest, neither of them went into the military. Chris, if you can share with us just very briefly, since we weren't able to have you in the program previously, very briefly, what motivated you to go into the Air Force? And can you share anything, any highlights or lowlights about your experience in the Air Force?
Well, the reason I went in is to further my experience. I'd already graduated from Penn State University, so I thought by going into the military I could become an officer and enhance my abilities. But things didn't go right. They kind of screwed me around because I had a student loan that was outstanding, so they wouldn't send me to officer training school. So I went in anyway and got married, and then once I got married, I enlisted. I got spent 5 years at Castle Air Force Base in Merced, and then they sent me to Korea for a year, which was a pretty bad experience. The old family thing, Johnny got your girl gone, so it was pretty disappointing. But I ended up getting out. I got a general discharge with honorable condition, and I had some pretty unusual circumstances while I was over there, and so I was glad to get out, because they said they were going to send me to officer training school, and they didn't. So the experience I had in the military wasn't that great. So I thank God that I got out without getting in any trouble or anything like that.
Can you elaborate just briefly, to the extent that you have knowledge, about why they hampered your interest in becoming an officer and didn't support you? Do you know why, or what would you attribute that to?
They said I had an outstanding student loan, so
I know, but
I went in with 2 strikes.
Pardon me?
I went in with 2 strikes. I didn't have the money to pay my student loan off, so I figured if I went in, I would be able to, get a loan and pay it off, but I wasn't able to do that. So I ended up getting married and stuff like that. So, Did you have anyone in your corner about becoming an officer?
Any of your superiors?
No.
And did it seem as though they took your interest seriously? The powers that were at the time?
Well,
because you made it known that you wanted to become an officer to your superiors, I suppose.
Right, and I had met a female in there that she said she had a student loan and that she still went to officer training school. So I was like, well, maybe this is one of those prejudice things. I was glad. I wasn't, I wanted to go into administration. It wasn't like a pilot or nothing like that. So I guess I wasn't really needed that much, as an administrative person.
This female, was she African of color?
Yes.
She was of color also. She was African American?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, Chris, for sharing that with us. Eric, did you want to talk about some of the experiences that you had that you weren't able to share because of time the last time we were on the program? By the way, I noticed you have on your cap. Is that the cap that you wore when you were over in Afghanistan?
Well, actually, I made 4 desert trips: 2002, 2007, 2009 and 10, and 2014. And this hat came from my first experience we were supporting what was going on in Afghanistan. I was a chaplain assistant at the time. And that was my shortest time. It was only about 45 days. The other ones were 6 months. But yeah, that was my first stop in 2002. So as I mentioned the last time, I joined at age 35. Around age 33, which 34 is a cutoff. And so around age 33, I started looking for some job that I could do some teaching, because I was teaching full time at Harrisburg High School. And so I began to look around, and most of them were positions for what I call G.I. Joe positions. I wasn't going on to be a Rambo. I wanted to do similar as Chris to enhance what I was already doing, but I wanted to do something with my hands. And so first they said computer science. They said no. Then they said be able to teach chemical warfare. I said no, I don't want to do that. So I just went in basically as an enlisted, one striper. I had a degree, of course. And I enlisted. I actually swore in 2 days before I would have been too old. I swore on January 12th, 1992, and I turned 35 January 14th. And so they didn't send me to basic training until January. So I was the oldest cat on in basic training. And so when I got there, they had already assigned me a role as the JORM chief. And so it was interesting doing shower stall counseling at 1 o'clock in the morning, because I had just left the high school, and here I was with 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-olds who were my peers. But it was a great experience. I'd only planned to do 6 years to get veteran status as a National Guard, and ended up doing 24. And I'm glad that I had the experience there. Now, you were mentioning about systemic kind of things, as Chris alluded to.
Yes.
We could refer to it as race. Well, I think Brother Richard James mentioned in the last show that if you're African-American in America and you've gone through any institutions, whether it's education, corporate America, military, you have probably witnessed or participated in some form of institutional or systemic racism.
That's correct.
And so around 1998, maybe, we were doing a 2-week training in England. And someone had did an investigative reporting article for the Washington Post, and they had found out that there was a statement made at the time, alleged statement, I should say, by the then chief of chaplains, Lorraine Potter, that she had made a reference or an allusion that African-American chaplains are primarily good for doing field type of administration, but could not handle the bigger stuff, doing war plans and strategies and so forth. And you can actually look that up. If you Google Lorraine Potter, African-American chaplains, and racism, it'll probably take you to around 1990, 91 to that reference. And I had my own experiences there. In fact, right here locally, I'm in Harrisburg. I'm part of 193rd here. And so who's ever watching that, but the reality is I came there with a degree with 1 stripe. And so the social actions officer was an African-American woman. And she said, why do you only have like 1 or 2 stripes? I think maybe it was 2. And it had been a year or 2 had gone by. I said, well, as far as I know, that's where I'm at. She said, no. She said, you want me to check into that? I said, no. So the next drill I came on Saturday, Sunday, she said, you sure you don't want me to test? Yeah, you can go ahead. And I was in computer operations, but they said I had to go into this particular area and then I would be upgraded. And so someone told me, said, no, they can give you, it was called below the grade. They can give you that rank without you having to do that, finish that extra duty. And so nevertheless, I got through 24 years as a master sergeant. And again, I was glad to make the trips, the training, bring back some, artifacts and gifts. And I could see, I didn't get to the ziggurat, the place where Abraham was born, but I can see it in Iraq, because the 2009, 2010, that was a resurgence of going to war with the Afghanis, with the Taliban and Al Qaeda. And so there was a lot of action going on. And so as a chaplain assistant, we were chaplain and chaplain assistant, a team of 2 for 500 Air National Guard, primarily the Red Horse, who were like the Seabees, but only Air Force. Mm-hmm. And make a long story short, so we were there for 6 months. And our job as a chaplain team, the 2 of us, was to visit 5 bases in Afghanistan and 4 in Iraq. So you can see we were traveling every week by helicopter, by C-130, by C-17. And students like to say, did you shoot anybody? Did you kill anybody? I said, no, I didn't have to, thank the Lord. But
Amen.
certainly taking those night flights in the Hueys and the Marine Stallions over the mountains and hills and looking down and seeing lights, you never knew if some action was going. But thank the Lord, didn't have to go into any firefight action stuff. But of course, we had to have our weapons ready, your M14 and your 9mm on you and your clips, just because anyone who goes to war, make no mistake, whether you're a cook, an admin person, you need to be able to be ready to go into some action if necessary. So, but I enjoyed the experience. So I've been out since 2016. I did 24 years, only plan to do 6. And there's some other things. I would say this. I was trying to get involved with diversity council at the local Guard base here in Middletown, and had some issues there. And my last 6 months to a year wasn't a happy experience. And I was ready to prepare a package to send to the former director of the Air National Guard, General Davis, who was the director during 9/11. And I had a whole big folder of information, including that article. And he had come to our base once for a prayer breakfast. And he said to the audience, he said, if I come back here in a year or two, your base should look like your community, because there weren't a lot of African-American Air National Guardsmen, male or female, at the base. And it's probably still the same. I was quoted in an article at this Unity Day at Fort Indiantown Gap, as saying that until we are intentional about changing how it looks at the base, it'll never happen. Because otherwise you can use a lot of different numbers to say that we are fulfilling equity. You can put women in there, you can put someone who may be Asian, and wrap it all together and say we're fulfilling having a cross section of ethnic groups. But nevertheless, it was a great experience.
Pardon me. Davis was
Sure.
black, wasn't he?
I'm sorry.
Davis was black, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
I knew Davis, but go right ahead.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, I wanted to make that sure. I don't think people maybe caught that, but go right. You're doing wonderful. I just want them to be clear to them that he was the black and
Yes,
the commander. Go right ahead. Yes,
He
sir.
was.
Eric, what was his rank? Do you remember?
He was a 4-star.
4-star general.
4-star general. And
Okay.
of course,
And
we all
speak-
know about General Chappie James, who was Daniel Chappie James, who was the first 4-star general
Yeah.
in the Air Force, and was a pilot. Flew in Korea,
That's right.
flew in World War II, flew in Vietnam, 3 wars.
Now
He
you were a non-commissioned officer. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And a commissioned officer starts at a lieutenant and then goes captain. And,
Yes. Second lieutenant, then lieutenant.
Okay. And actually, as a non-commissioned officer, you were actually the highest non-commissioned officer rank is a senior master sergeant. I mean, is that correct?
Well,
Or
it's-
chief
I
master?
was master,
or
but
chief?
then a senior and chief.
Okay.
Yes.
So you were actually two levels away from being at the top.
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I
And-
got in, I could have gotten in with a waiver. I was told later to go to officers training later, but I wasn't told about a waiver, so I just went straight enlisted.
Right. I wanted to ask you about being assigned as the dorm chief. When you first got there, they made you dorm chief. Before you even got there,
Because of my
decided that you were
age.
Pardon me?
Because of my age.
You think it was because of that reason?
Well, the training instructor, the TI, told me that.
Okay.
They
Now, did
figured
you
I would
remain?
have
Did you
influence.
remain the dorm chief the entire time?
No, there was a young man from Pittsburgh who one evening the training instructor came in and said I was being too soft on the flight. So he said his name was William Marshall. He said, Robert Marshall, you want to take the job? You see, you have a problem with that, Airman Jackson? I said, no. So Marshall took the job for 2 days and he couldn't handle it, so he gave it back.
So you actually spent almost the entire time of your basic training as a dorm chief.
As a dorm chief.
Wow, that's
as a-
impressive.
And
Now, do they have honor graduates for basic training or just for tech school?
no, they do. No, I wasn't an honor graduate, but we did one thing that wasn't traditional. For our graduation, I asked if we could sing "It's So Hard to Say Goodbye," and they let us. So there at the ceremony, it was about 4 of us. It was 2 white cats and two brothers, 5 of us, and we practiced and we acapella. It's so hard. Probably the first time that was done, other than the traditional songs, Air Force songs.
Can you share with us just a verse or two, or a little bit, because the audience, some of the audience may not be familiar with that song. I am, and I don't know, Richard and Chris.
Oh, I am. Yes, indeed.
Can you share just a little of that song, Eric? Are you prepared? I know you caught you off guard.
The words don't come, but it's a Boys to Men song.
Right. It's so hard.
It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Yep.
I wanted to talk a little bit about myself. In my Air Force experience, again, I was there. I was in the Air Force for six years, and I went to San Antonio like all basic training is held. And I actually, at that time, had finished undergraduate school and had already been accepted into graduate school. And I was among the oldest, like you. You were the oldest. I was among the oldest. I was in my mid-20s. Mm-hmm. And part of my desire, reason was, it's interesting because having gone to a Quaker high school and was indoctrinated with pacifism during the Vietnam War, I had absolutely no interest in joining the military. When I finished high school, I wanted to go to college and, find my way. And I actually applied for conscientious objectors status in 1971, which is when I graduated from high school. And I went to the Selective Service Board, the draft board, because the draft was still going on at that time. It's not going on now, as many of you know in the audience, but they more or less kind of laughed at me at the Selective Service Board because, blacks back then, and I don't know if it's today, but blacks back then, you didn't do CO status. You didn't do conscientious objector status. If you were drafted, you were sent to Vietnam. Yeah. So it was as simple as that. And of course, we all know many people who were sent to Vietnam and many of whom did not come back. They were killed in action. So they told me that, they sent a letter to me, which I still have, which says basically your request for CO status is denied. And as I've gotten older, I've learned about some of the ways that some people handled the draft and the Vietnam War. Some people, of course, left and went to Canada. Some disappeared. I know at least one person whose name will remain anonymous was going to be pre-med. And at the time, the DOD, the Department of Defense, had a policy: if you didn't have the grades, then you could be drafted. And so this person who wanted to be a physician said he was more concerned about being drafted that he switched majors from pre-med to English because he knew he could do very well in English and have the grades and not have to worry about being drafted. So that's what happened. I know another person around that time who, fortunately, he had a lot of connections and he was able to get CO status, and he actually went to Jamaica and taught for 2 years with the Friends Service Committee. Mm-hmm. But when I went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio for basic training, and basic training is about 6 weeks. I don't think it's changed over the decades. And unlike you, Eric, who was assigned the dorm chief position when you first got there,
right?
They went through my squadron. The squadron's about 50 people or so. Is that right, Chris or Eric?
Yeah, I think it's about 50.
Yeah. They went through about 5 dorm chiefs or squadron leaders, flight leaders, before they got to me. And that took maybe, out of the 6 weeks, that took at least 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks before they got to me. And I kept it for the remainder of the time that we were there. I remained the flight squadron leader. And I did make honor graduate for basic training. And then I went to tech school in Shepherd, Wichita Falls, Texas. And I was a health administrator. And I made honor graduate for tech school as well. And then when I got out, well, not when I got out of basic training in tech school, I started graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, getting a master's in city and regional planning. And I thought that with my credentials, I would be able to become an officer. And I let it be known to the powers that were that I wanted to become an officer. And they basically kind of dismissed me. And so after 6 years, I moved to Virginia from Pennsylvania, and I would have had to have driven to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia Beach or Andrews Air Force in DC, which would have a 3-hour drive each way for my weekend duty. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I was eligible to get out after 6 years. So I decided to just get out. But I had some experiences while I was there. I remember one time I went over to McGuire Air Force Base to play basketball at the base gym. And as I was running back to my barracks where I was staying for the weekend duty, once a month we had to do, for those who don't know in the audience, once a month you go, if you're in the reserve or the guard, you go to a base and you do your weekend duty. I went over there and I was running back from the gym, and I see this Jeep barreling down towards me, and these two MPs jump out of the vehicle. They were not of color. And one of them had like a 38 and the other had like a 45. And I had my gym bag with me, and they basically treated me like I was a terrorist or something. So I went to the police headquarters immediately after that happened and reported what had happened to me. And it really affected me as to, you know, we're supposed to be in this organization together and you're treating me like a criminal. So I started thinking, no, I don't think I want to be a part of someone that doesn't really treat me like I'm a part of the organization. But that was one experience. And I recall another thing that made me decide to get out was my wife and I had gone to the Caribbean for our honeymoon in 1983. We were there in August, which was her birth. We were there on the ship, the cruise ship, when her birthday occurred. We planned it that way. And one of the islands that we visited was Grenada. And that following month, September, we had talked to some of the native people, and then we knew that there was a medical school in Grenada. And that next month, we decided to, quote, invade Grenada because there was an uprising in the country. And the reason for the US going there purportedly was because we wanted to, quote, save the medical students. But underneath that, there was at least one other reason. And that reason was that the Russians and the Cubans were building an air force, like a place where, you know, planes could land and leave. And not only were the Cubans and the Russians involved, but the Canadians were involved, and the Japanese were involved, and maybe some other countries. And I don't think that the U.S. didn't want the Russians or the Cubans to have that kind of control in the country, because I think the Russians and the Cubans may have been supporting the insurgents, those who were attempting to have a coup in the country. But it really hurt me because one of the things that happened as a result of the US going down there was that we bombed up everywhere in that country, including hospitals. We actually dropped bombs on hospitals. And I said, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to be a part of an organization that, does stuff like that. I mean, I know that war involves, those kinds of unintended consequences. Another thing that happened to me that made me decide to get out was we went to Panama and, ousted Noriega. And I was in a medical unit, a MASH unit, and I was an administrator in the unit, but we had doctors and nurses and dentists and the like. And it was a possibility that we were going to be sent to wherever there was a conflict, an armed conflict. Fortunately, my unit didn't have to go there. And it was, that particular episode in Panama didn't last that long. But I kind of looked at all those things and decided that I had gotten enough out of the military, and the fact that they didn't really support me in my interest in becoming an officer, like the two of you, Chris and Eric. And then after I got out, I went to law school and contemplated, after I passed the bar, graduated and passed the bar, to go back in as a JAG officer, as a lawyer, a JAG, an officer, justice advocate. But I decided that I wanted to leave it alone and not go back in. I could have gone back in as an officer, but I decided not to do it. We have about 20 minutes or so to go. And I wanted to turn to, before I move on, I wanted to know if Chris had anything after listening to Eric and myself talk. If there's anything you wanted to add at this time, Chris?
Yeah,
You
Tony,
can
move your chair to the left a little bit.
Okay. Anything you
Yeah.
want to, thanks, sir. Anything you want to offer, Chris, at this time?
Not really. Before I got out, I had to meet with the staff judge advocates because I wanted to get out. I didn't want to stay in there anymore, so I had to go to. It was almost like a trial, and it was general. They said if you get out, you're not going to find a better job in the Air Force when you get out. So I was like, they was trying to intimidate me to stay in, but I'd already made my mind up, especially after I didn't go to officer training school, and I was
Right.
like, hey, and I asked a lawyer, like a staff, she was like, do you want to get out, Mr. Jackson? I said, yes. So I got out, everything worked out, I got away from the military,
Right.
At age 68, I retired. I ended up getting a decent job and retired. So there's a lot of stuff, you see a lot of movies and stuff about the military and stuff like that. Like, especially, what was the name of that movie? Soldier what?
We Were Soldiers.
And Mel Gibson, yeah.
Oh, Soldier Story. Soldier Story.
Soldier Sport.
Right.
Yeah, it was, so it was a lot of experiences. I could be very strong, especially when I was in Korea, because, you homesick, if you're going through some things with your marriage and stuff, that can really get to you.
Yeah.
So, thank God that I had enough strength to make it through, because, I was getting kind of, you go to the mailbox and you don't get no mail from your wife for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you can kind of wonder what's going on. So
I had that very experience, Chris. I had just gotten married in, as I said, March of '92. Went to basic training in November of '92. But before I went to basic training in November of '92, I had a similar marital situation. It wasn't so much Jody got your girl and gone, but it was a Jody situation. And so when I got to the base, my drill instructor, training instructor, and I both were going through a situation with marriage. So and I wasn't getting mail from home. And we go to the day room, and all the other guys, the young guys, were getting mail from home, and they were laughing about what was going on. And I had yet to get a letter from home.
Now, this was in basic training, Eric?
This is why I was in basic training.
Right.
And so
unlike Chris's situation, he had finished basic and had gone to Korea. I just want to make that clarification.
Right. But yeah, that
I've been stationed in California for 5 years before I got an overseas assignment. So I was already married, and things were going pretty good then until I left.
Okay. Now, Eric, can you? I know you've been very interested in this subject from a military macro perspective, and how the military assignments can have as the potential, and it often has resulted in marriages ending. I know
Yes.
you've done some thought thinking about that, and you've also done some counseling while you were in as a a pastor. Can you kind of sum up any thoughts that you may have about that? I know you and I have talked about.
Right. Yeah, sure. So I was a licensed ordained minister on by the time I finished my last 15 or so years, 20 years or so. And so, although I couldn't act as an officer locally or when I was stationed abroad, it was recognized. And so oftentimes I would do, as I said, even in basic training, shower stall counseling with the young guys who wanted to go AWOL. But their situation happened kind of in a mass situation. A lot of marriages broke up, particularly with airborne soldiers, because particularly, for example, at Fort Bragg, which is the major airborne Army location installation, they have to be ready within 24 hours or less to go. And a lot of guys get married before they go in the military. Once they get in the military, they're constantly going. Their mindset is somewhat on war type stuff, and they come home, they might buy a new car and get some equipment, stereo equipment, but they're still on that age because the general wants to keep them in battle ready position.
It's not military is not for everybody, because Uncle Sam, just like they got to fight. The veterans have to fight for the stuff they get when they should be awarded this kind of stuff for even going fighting for your country.
Yeah.
Or serving your country, and they know what they be doing.
Yeah.
They know what they be doing.
Oh yeah. In fact, one of the generals down at Fort Bragg, I was reading the Fayetteville Observer when I was living there around 2003 and 4, and the general was asked a question about how he wants the soldiers' mind to be. He said, I just need them to be battle ready. In other words, the home front is one thing, but from my position as a general, I need them to be able to get a bag together, get ready, get their parachute, get on the plane within 24 hours. And so, yeah, you're right, Chris. That's the main piece when you belong to whatever branch, that's what they want out of you, is to be able to perform your task and your duty as part of the war machine.
Well, one of the points I wanted to highlight about our discussion this afternoon is, I think Chris kind of touched on it when he said that they told him that if he got out, this was one of the best jobs he could ever have, and in the military. And for many, that is true. I'm sure all of us know African Americans who have been able to advance and get promoted, become commissioned. We made colonels, lieutenant colonels, generals. I know some myself personally.
It also depends on what kind of person you are. If you're a person like I was,
If you were what kind of person? What was that, Chris? If you were what kind of person? Pardon?
A rebellious person.
Oh, rebellious. Okay. Yes, sir.
You're not gonna treat me any kind of way and me not speak out for myself.
I heard
right,
that.
I understand. Yeah, the people I know, and I'm not. The people I know who become.
I wasn't that type of. I wasn't raised like that.
Yeah, but the people I know who became officers, the African Americans I know who became commissioned officers, and I'm not trying to disparage those folks, but most of them, and I had a recent experience with a colonel just recently. We had dinner together, and even though he's woke, if you will, he knows what's going on. he would be willing to go along or to get along. And as a result, he was able to be promoted, to become a colonel. But I had a discussion with him about changing the names of particularly some of the southern military bases from having Confederate soldiers named after Confederate soldiers, these bases. And he was saying, well, why should we do that? And I'm like, wait a minute. Why should we have bases in the South and even probably some in the North that's named after Confederate soldiers? What kind of sense does that make? That doesn't make any kind of sense whatsoever. And he was like, I don't have any problems, but he eventually kind of came around and said, yeah, I have to agree with you that they should change that. And that's happened all over the country. It's still going on where they're changing the names of military bases. I wanted to pivot and talk very briefly, Eric, about We Were Soldiers. That book was mentioned. And Eric, can you talk about our first cousin William, who died in November of 1965 at the Battle of Idrain, which was one of the first major military battles in Vietnam. Can you talk about when we had the going away party for William in January of 65 and what he shared with you?
Sure, I know we're short on time. So I was 8 years old, and with, of course, having a large family, we always had house parties.
Go ahead, Eric. Oh, we can't hear you. Can we?
You're muted, Elder Jackson.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Oh, okay,
So we
cool.
were talking about the Idrain, We Were Soldiers once, the movie, and the fact that we had our first cousin, William Brooks Mitchell, who was a part of that movie. Actually, he was one of the headquarters medics for Colonel then Hal Moore, and we had his going away party at our house on H Street in Chester. And I happened to be eavesdropping. I had come downstairs, and some of the brothers and cousins had taken William on the porch. And I can remember him crying, saying that he wasn't coming back, meaning alive. And they were consoling, said, yes, we'll have a party when you get back and so forth. And so he left in the spring, having worked another full-time job before he left. He was 22, 23 years old. Of course, went through his combat SEAL training at Fort Benning, which is where most of them were trained, did training for that. And they were starting to do they were going to use helicopters to bring men in. And so he was a medic. And so known as the first big battle of the Vietnam War was the battle of the Idrain Valley in the Central Highlands in Vietnam. And it was about a 3-day battle. When they left the United States, they were already short-handed. They came upon a mountain of North Vietnamese army soldiers who were just like Marines, and they only had about 400 men. They were short on medics. William was a medic assigned out to headquarters company. And long story short, he was killed during the battle on the 15th of November, 1965. And I was reading a copy of the book at the Colonial Mall here in Harrisburg, probably around 1995, and I saw his name in it, of those who was killed. And I began to make some phone calls using white pages, and I got in touch with Joe Galloway. I got in touch with Bill Beck, who had went to Steel High and was a machine gunner in that same battle. And I finally got a hold of Ron Cezanne, who was another medic who was from Louisiana, but didn't go into battle because he had malaria. So William was assigned out because, as you know, their group was almost overrun by the Vietnamese. And so I just remember crying and hearing him crying, and then getting the news. I was in 3rd grade and came home, and Mom said that cousin William is dead. And it was a closed casket. And of course, his nephew Kirby Mitchell has done a lot of research on what actually happened to him. Actually how he died, and so we've read some after action reports. But yes, they've made a movie about it, and Tony and I both were able to get to their annual reunions. I went for about 9 years and was able to sing at the wall for that same unit that would come back once a year. And I would sing the national anthem and the Lord's Prayer at the wall, 6 o'clock in the morning every November for about 6 years. From 1996 until 2004 is when I was gone, and Tony won a few of those years. So William was one of the first soldiers or military personnel to be killed during the Vietnam War from Delaware County. And there's a park named after him between 7th and I guess 9th Street there. I'm not sure how well it's kept, but yeah, it was an experience. And I used to stay up and watch the war on TV for 10 years. 6 o'clock, 11 o'clock news. It was just something I was compelled to watch and see what was going on. And glad to have been able to have been of some counsel, I believe, to some of the soldiers during the course of the banquet and also in the suite that they would have after the banquet. So yeah, we have a close connection. And of course, our brother Lou spent a year, 67, even during the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, and has his own stories himself.
Yeah. And Eric, you actually got to know Joe Galloway, who was the UPI correspondent who was in the battle, and the commander, Hal Moore, both of whom have passed on. Joe passed a couple years ago in Concord, North Carolina, and Hal Moore passed before Joe did. I know you have books, you've had autographed books that they both autographed, and you actually had them autograph a book that you gave to our brother Lewis, who's in Colorado. Of course, you also know that when Hal Moore's wife passed, Hal Moore decided that he was no longer going to have the gathering, the reunion every year. So he stopped that when his wife passed. And you and I have talked about trying to start it up again. Even though neither one of us, of course, was in the battle, we
Right.
got to know a lot of the men who came back. Some of them, many of them, fortunately, are in, good physical and mental shape. But all the others who they have the battle scars, the amputations, some mental health, drug abuse, alcoholism, failed marriages, and the like is a consequence of military.
Agent Orange disease, of course, from the
Agent Orange disease, and also issues regarding getting veterans benefits for disability. As a matter of fact, can you just share briefly your own journey with getting disability, and what percentage do you have at the present time?
Well, that's still in progress, but basically, in my injury was not doing a military armed conflict firefight type, but
And that makes a difference.
anytime you're working and you're in uniform.
That makes a difference if you weren't disabled during the combat time, or
It will make a difference in terms of maybe how quickly you might get compensated.
yes.
Depending on what happened, but it's all called a line of duty, and so we're still working on that.
So you have a percentage right now though, and you're trying to get more or a higher percentage?
Yeah, I have a problem because I was around burn pits in Afghanistan and Iraq. Anyone, just like with those who were around Agent Orange in Vietnam, if they develop diabetes or prostate cancer, there automatically has a connection. And so mine, with having COPD and asthma, which I developed in my late 50s, and I was still active duty, then they have a PAC Act program that just started. But so I've been pushing, trying to see what can happen in terms of some additional VA claims. Prayerfully, something.
I know that I'd asked Richard James to interject, and he hasn't said anything. I think he's enjoyed listening to us and learning a lot. But Richard, we only have about 5 minutes left. I know you actually knew my cousin William and the Mitchell family. Did you have anything that you wanted to add about others and who you knew who didn't come back, or even about William?
No, but no, not on that issue. But I do want to say something in regards to the National Guard. Let me talk about the structure of the National Guard. There was the Air National Guard and there was the Army National Guard. And Eric just mentioned he was in the reserve, and he mentioned General Davis. And General Davis, who was a black general who was over the Air National Guard. Well, they reported that the National Guard reports to the governor. And at the time, the governor was Governor Robert P. Casey Sr.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the department that oversaw the National Guard was the Department of Military Affairs. Now, at the time, I was in the governor's office, and I was director of the Commonwealth's Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity Program. In other words, I oversee the problems in terms of process, in terms of discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
That was my job, and so I interacted with General Davis. I also interacted with the individuals in the Department of Military Affairs. The problem was that we assigned generally the person who was over processing human resources and personnel, but also the responsibility of handling these kind of complaints. Now that system could have been a much better system, because we should have had a separate individual to handle those complaints. Because I'm just listening to some of the issues, that you had to deal with, and that never got to the level where we could do something about it. And the problem was exactly what the structure was. But I'm familiar with some of that. Davis was located at a period of time at Indiantown Gap, which I live, by the way, about 12 miles from Indiantown Gap, and spent a lot of time there. But there's no way that systemic discrimination would not exist in any institution in this country. And the sad thing, though, even though we could have people who are at the top that may have been pro-integration and anti-slavery and anti-discrimination, sometimes these issues that never reach them. You never know. My governor was the greatest civil rights governor that the nation had ever seen. He appointed more individuals of African American descent and high-level positions than any other governor before or since. The Commissioner of State Police, the head of the Department of Correction, the Director of Welfare.
Speaker of the House.
Excuse me.
No, saying Speaker of the House.
Well, the Speaker of the House, he was was black at that time too, and he was a great man. But the battle continues, and the battle goes on. And I'm just listening to some of the atrocities that folks are still going with. And I heard that Winfrey said that he wasn't the kind of person that would just stand for that, that type of thing. And we need more of that. We need more people who will stand up and speak the truth and work against those type of discrimination. We're down to the end of the program, gentlemen. We got 1 minute left. And I want to say, again, it's an education. And if I can just say this to you, Eric, I know you are a brilliant writer. And that's not a vain compliment. You are a brilliant writer. And I think that some of the things that you gentlemen are talking about has got to be put in print for posterity, because other individuals can learn from this. And in spite of these obstacles, I'm talking to a family that has PhDs. I'm talking to a family that has attorneys. I'm talking to a family that has medical doctors, master's degrees. Eric has taught English for many, many, many years, and he's committed. I'm talking to individuals that are committed to people and they're committed to serving, and at the same time have done a lot for themselves. I want to thank you, each and one of you, first of all, for being my friend and my brothers, but thank you for coming on and sharing your story with the world, because ours is a worldwide web. I have relatives that listen to our program once in Africa and in California. So and it's a greater story to be told.
Yes,
So
sir.
we really didn't get to the athletics, and so I think that you guys were so accomplished in that area. At some point, I would recommend that we do that. And another issue that I think that I like to see, I'm gonna be honest, straight up, I want to see Amanda Jackson come on and tell you something about the ladies in
Yes,
the Jackson family, to
Yes.
talk about your sweet black mama
that's right.
that brought you folks into the world. And she stood up
Yes, you
during
did.
discrimination. I'm talking about your mother.
Segregation.
And then you had an old sister, Rebecca. I was in school with Rebecca Jackson. Thank God for the Jackson family. Thank God for you. And thank God for the camaraderie and love that you have with each other. I don't think there's anything greater than that. So I want to say to my friends, my audience, my brothers and sisters, these are the kind of things and kind of shows we have on the Richard James Show. And I'm hoping, pray to God that, they will come back again. Anybody want to make a quick closing remark?
I just want to mention that as you talk about institutional discrimination and things that went on in the military, you don't hear about the mutinies on ships or the fighting in mess halls and even around the hooches in Vietnam. But those are the kind of experiences that many of our progenitors, what they went through. But we're still here, and we have new generations that will hear our stories. And I hope and pray that we're telling our children and grandchildren the stories of what we had to go through to get where we are today.
Thank you, sir. And
I just wanted to thank you, Richard and Reverend Thomas, for allowing us to be a part of what you're doing, which is great work, educating, enlightening, and having fun. And we love you. Thank you much.
And we love you too.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you, Richard and Brother Charles.
Well, God bless you and keep you. And this is Richard James, your neighbor and your friend, saying so long to next week. Take care now.
And we all salute you, Brother Rich.
Thank you. We salute you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Amen.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long.